This week on the BackTable Podcast.
As that time period went on, they continued to evolve the algorithm from the original one to make it more accurate and eventually got FDA clearance in 2018. It was cleared in a de novo classification, meaning it established a new category of contraception, which under the FDA classification was called software application for contraception. It's a little bit of a mouthful. We sort of abbreviated digital contraception because it sort of gets the same point across. But I think it's really important to realize that this is something that's different than traditional fertility awareness methods.
Natural Cycles, the only digital contraceptive of its kind, FDA cleared for 8 years, hormone-free, non-invasive birth control that is 98% effective with perfect use and 93% effective with typical use. Here are the benefits of NC birth control. An FDA-cleared medical device that utilizes temperature and other biomarker data that's backed by science and research and covered by select insurance providers. NC Birth Control is designed to be unique to each user, providing data reports for healthcare providers for meaningful office visits. Prescribe Natural Cycles to Alto Pharmacy today. To learn more, visit www.naturalcycles.com/HCP.
My name is Ruchika Talwar, and I'm a urologic oncologist in Nashville, Tennessee. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Dr. Kerry Krauss, who's an OBGYN in the greater Philadelphia area and senior medical advisor for Natural Cycles. Kerry and I are going to be having a really interesting conversation centered around digital health tools for contraceptive and reproductive care for women. Kerry, thanks for being here. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Why don't you start off just by telling the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So as you said, I'm an OBGYN outside of Philadelphia. I've been in practice for about close to 10 years now. Philly born and bred. I do full scope OBGYN care. I joined Natural Cycles about 2 years ago. I've always been really interested in tech, and I was always a wearable nerd, trying out the latest wearable that came on the market. And as a women's health professional, really interested in the potential that it carried for furthering women's health and getting women to understand their health better. So when I was presented with the opportunity to join Natural Cycles as an advisor, I was really excited about it. I honestly had never heard about Natural Cycles before. As I learned more about it, I said, I can't believe I don't know about this. This is really, really interesting. And it's been a really interesting journey over the past couple of years, seeing things from the business side as well as the clinical side. And so, happy to share with the guests here a little bit about my journey and also about Natural Cycles.
Yeah. It's interesting. Digital health tools, as you alluded to, are just increasingly intersecting with healthcare in general. We're seeing uptake, I think, across all disease spaces. And I'd have to say, reproductive care is not the first area that comes to mind when I think about wearables and digital health solutions. Yeah, contraception is definitely one of the most commonly prescribed interventions in the field for general gynecologists and obstetrics all over the country. But I know that there are some pain points associated with contraception. It's common. It's been out there for a while. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what you hear in your clinic?
Yeah, so contraception, I think, is definitely one of the more controversial topics, I think, for both clinicians and patients. There seems to be, I think clinicians have their ideas of what constitutes, contraceptions that patients should use or methods that patients should use. And then patients often come with certain notions, maybe things that they've read. Obviously, misinformation is at an all-time high in all areas but certainly around contraception, that's also the case. And some of those things are true, things like there are side effects to certain methods and considerations when you're prescribing a certain method of contraception that someone might have heard, I heard it's really painful to get an IUD put in. It's like, well, yes, it can be, but also there's lots of things you can do to mitigate that. And, I think it's always tough to reconcile sort of the truth and then, or even what's appropriate for one individual patient with the available options. And I think that's really the challenge for OBGYNs today, is to sort of reconcile all of those outside and, inside influences from what makes a patient choose a certain option for contraception.
Yeah, and you covered the pain associated with IUDs. What about hormonal birth control pills? What are the biggest pain points for patients there?
Yeah, I think it's definitely sort of side effects and, like external hormones or synthetic hormones. And are they going to give me cancer? Are they going to give me decreased libido, bleeding? There's sort of, you name it, it's probably associated with a hormonal birth control side effect. And so I think sometimes those risks can be overblown. Obviously, hormonal birth control was one of the most, groundbreaking inventions of, I think, the 20th century. And yes, it is true that some women do have side effects with hormonal birth control. There are some women that can't take hormonal birth control. And while there may be a slightly increased risk for breast cancer, there's also decreased risk for uterine and ovarian cancer. So it's tough to, sort of reconcile all of that in one visit and go through all the data when there's a lot of, sort of preconceived notions and things that they might have heard online that may have been very sort of biased opinions. So I think trying to set the record straight on hormonal birth control can sometimes be, a tough job for clinicians.
Yeah. And how did all of that bring us to where, the topic we're talking about today, digital, non-hormonal contraception? Where did we start? Where did this all emerge from? And where are we today?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting story, I think, because I'll just go into a little bit about how Natural Cycles was founded, because it's a really, like I said, interesting story. So Dr. Alina Berglund is a PhD particle physicist who was working at CERN in Switzerland as part of the Nobel Prize winning team that discovered the Higgs boson particle.
Oh, wow.
And so she, while working on this Nobel Prize winning discovery, of course, she married her husband, who's also a PhD physicist, Raoul Scherwitzel. And she said, I know I want to have a baby eventually, but I've got a lot going on now. And, I tried a hormonal birth control method that I didn't like so much, had some side effects. I wonder if there's a way I can, using my basal body temperature, figure out how to predict my cycles in a way that's more accurate than the traditional fertility awareness methods. Because I know all about data algorithms and how to manage complex sets of data and how to make accurate predictions and filter out inaccurate data points. And so she created what was the first Natural Cycles algorithm. And eventually, she was using it. All of her friends started using it because they were like, oh, that's really cool. Like, I kind of want to do that too. And they eventually, her husband, I think, said to her, like, I think you're onto something here. This is really interesting. And so they actually created and founded the company together, went through all the research. They did a lot of studies proving the effectiveness of Natural Cycles. And of course, as that time period went on, they continued to evolve the algorithm from the original one to make it more accurate, and eventually got FDA clearance in 2018. And I will say, it was cleared in a de novo classification, meaning it established a new category of contraception, which under the FDA classification was called software application for contraception. It's a little bit of a mouthful. We sort of abbreviated digital contraception because it sort of gets the same point across. But I think it's really important to realize that this is something that's different than traditional fertility awareness methods. And I'll, obviously we'll go into a little bit about why that is. But, I think a lot of OBGYNs, including me at the time, had not heard that this happened. This was something also because of the risk classification by the FDA, it didn't have to be prescribed. So it could be essentially direct to consumer. And Natural Cycles is still direct to consumer. Now it can also be reimbursed by insurance if it's prescribed by a physician. And we'll get into that later. But I think because there was a direct-to-consumer market initially, a lot of physicians just didn't know about it. And there wasn't a lot of coverage in professional societies or talk in professional societies about digital contraception. I think now that's coming much more into the forefront, and people are starting to talk about these methods, in large part because that's what a lot of patients want. Like, there are a lot of patients that are coming to the office saying, I don't want hormones for whatever reason. And some of it may be due to misinformation online. But increasingly, women are seeking these kind of options, also just seeking insights about their body in general. I think, well, what is my body actually doing? What is my normal cycle? I've been on birth control for so long. Like, I want to learn more about what my natural cycle is. And, again, this is something that Natural Cycles does because it tracks that basal temperature, the body temperature, whereas like other periods trackers don't. It really does give you a little bit more data into what your cycle is doing.
Yeah, that was the first question that came to mind for me. It's like, how is this different from the old school method of just keeping a calendar and tracking, my cycle that way? But it's interesting, you alluded to this temperature is part of this algorithm. But let's dive in. Give me a little bit more of a primer on how Natural Cycles actually works.
Yeah, so essentially it's 3 steps, at least from the user perspective. You take your temperature, and most of our users use a wearable device at this point. So Natural Cycles integrates with the Oura Ring and the Apple Watch. Series 8 and above will take your temperature. So all you have to do essentially is wear a wearable at night. Actually, I should also mention we have now the NC band. So that's a band that comes with an annual subscription that measures your temperature and heart rate overnight. You could also wear it all the time if you want, but as long as you wear a device overnight, it will measure your temperature. We also, in the initial model of Natural Cycles, we had the basal body thermometer, but we're now phasing that out in replacement, having the NC band. So you measure your temperature overnight. In the morning, you open the app, your temperature syncs automatically, and you get a daily fertility status. So from the user experience, it's pretty seamless. All you do is open the app and wear your wearable at night.
No, it's interesting. It's like these wearables are so integrated, I think, into our life. Like I'm holding my hand up. I have my Apple Watch and my Oura Ring on, both. Why do I have both? Yeah. But it's really interesting to think about how this sort of fits into things we may already be doing to learn, about our own healthcare data. So that's interesting. Tell me, how does the basal body temperature that you're describing and all the other biometric inputs, how does that actually give us insight into ovulation?
Yeah, and that's a really important question because I think a lot of people are wearing these wearables and they're getting different outputs either from the Apple Health algorithm or the Oura algorithm, which are, by the way, different than the Natural Cycles algorithm. We pull data from these wearables, but we don't give data back. It's unidirectional, and we use our own algorithm. And it's, I think, also important to realize that our algorithm is the only one that's been vetted for contraception. These other algorithms are more meant for just fertility insights, not necessarily for preventing pregnancy. And what the Natural Cycles algorithm does is, especially, even in the case of irregular cycles, because again, we're trying to predict when that ovulation is going to occur so that we can adjust the fertile window accordingly. If there is that degree of uncertainty, the algorithm will err on the side of being a conservative prediction, meaning if the algorithm is not absolutely sure that you're not fertile on that day, it will say you could possibly be fertile. And that's a really important distinction from other sort of period trackers, even ones that use basal body temperature.
And what's the data that you have on effectiveness?
Yeah, one of the things that when I first learned about Natural Cycles, I was kind of blown away about, because the number of women that they had in their effectiveness studies was kind of unmatched to what I had seen in a lot of other effectiveness studies. But so again, these are real world prospective observational trials of over 200,000 women at this point that show about a 93% effectiveness with typical use and 98 with perfect use. And just to clarify what that means in the context of, digital birth control. So if you have typical use, that is even patients who are having unprotected sex on red days. So again, they're using it, it's the same thing, like even if the condom breaks, like, it's including non-perfect use. Perfect use also includes condom breaking. And it also includes app or algorithm failure. So essentially giving a wrong safe day or a wrong green day.
How does the algorithm handle variability? For example, let's say it's flu season at the time that we're recording this.
Yeah.
If I have a fever, or if I'm on call, for example, and I have maybe a data that's being, my data inputs are different from my baseline. How does that play into all of this? Because, a lot of human day-to-day life adjusts some of these readings accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where wearables have really changed the game, because they monitor other biometrics, right? Like they do your heart rate and activity. So, actually, I would wear my Oura Ring when I was on call, and I was like, always curious, like, is it going to sync automatically even when I'm getting up and down at night on call? And in fact, my Oura Ring would be able to tell, because I was up and down all night, that's not a valid basal body temperature. We're going to exclude that temperature. It would do it automatically. Like I wouldn't even have to tell it I was up all night. And then the other thing is because there's heart rate. So for instance, if you have a fever, it's not just going to be your temperature that's elevated, your heart rate's going to be elevated too. So a lot of times, because you have that heart rate data, the algorithm, both on the natural cycles end and the Aura end, can tell that it's not a true elevated temperature from a progesterone rise. So it will eliminate that data point. So I think that's kind of what made me reframe the way I think about fertility awareness methods, and also really what makes this method different from all the methods that we've had in the past.
Yeah. And who is the ideal patient for this type of contraceptive method?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we really don't have any contraindications to using natural cycles. It is only approved for 18 and older because that's the group that the effectiveness trials were done in. But you also, want someone who's going to be technologically literate, that is willing to abstain from intercourse on red days. Also that their partner is willing to abstain or use backup barrier protection on red days. We do have a partner mode, by the way, so the partners can actually see what the predicted days in the next few days are. So I think especially for because we do also have a planned pregnancy mode, it's sometimes they really like that to be able to know when go time is. Also irregular cycles is always a question we get asked because that's typically, in the old school fertility awareness methods, a lot of them couldn't be used with irregular cycles. So we can be, and we've actually done a subgroup analysis showing similar effectiveness for women with irregular cycles. That being said, I would just consider that if your cycles are highly irregular, you are going to get more red days. Your red day window is going to be very wide because there's just going to be more variability. And, especially if you're only say, I actually have PCOS, so it's something that I'm very conscious of. And, if you're someone with PCOS that gets your periods twice a year, this is not maybe going to be the best method for you. So I think it's more considerations rather than contraindications. And then, obviously access to a wearable device. Again, we provide one with the NC band with a subscription. But yeah, so those are the main considerations.
You talked about this idea of red days. I want to dive more in what that means and talk about the user experience.
Yeah, so we kind of have this stoplight system, kind of to make it very clear for patients. So basically, green means go. So in birth control mode, if you get a green day, that means you're not fertile and you can have sex without protection and not worry about getting pregnant. If you have a red day, that's a day where you could possibly be fertile and you should either abstain or use a backup method, such as a condom or another barrier method.
Got it. You also talked a little bit about this idea of pregnancy mode. I'm inferring what that is, but maybe you can share with the audience a bit more about what that is, how that user setup may look different from the traditional settings.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Birth control mode was kind of the original impetus for developing natural cycles, but it has since evolved, because obviously essentially what natural cycles has created is a really efficient way to tell what's going on with the menstrual cycle and when ovulation is going to occur. So, obviously, if you know when ovulation is going to occur, you can then flip that algorithm if your goal is to plan pregnancy and use it to predict when you're going to ovulate to conceive. So essentially, after birth control mode was established, we then established planned pregnancy mode, which it's a little bit more complex than just flipping the algorithm around, but essentially that's what we did. And then we also developed follow pregnancy mode. So once you conceive, we actually have week by week guidance on what to expect as you're pregnant. We have postpartum mode. So it's a guide to, recovering postpartum. And then also you can track temperatures and actually see when your first ovulation occurs. So you can get some sense of, when your fertility's coming back. And then we just launched NC perimenopause mode. We were really excited about that, kind of getting into what changes are occurring in perimenopause and giving women some idea of what to expect in terms of where they are in the perimenopausal transition based on what their cycles are doing, what their ovulation is doing, how their follicular phase or luteal phase might be shortening during perimenopause. So we were really, really excited about that mode as well.
Yeah. And so there's tons of useful information for patients who choose this sort of digital health tool. But what kind of information does this product provide for healthcare practitioners? Is there insights that, you could use to maybe have conversations with your OBGYN?
Yeah, so this is something that's near and dear to my heart, especially as a woman with PCOS. And I've treated lots of women with PCOS. And when I first heard about this tool, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the data that like women with PCOS have been needing for so long. I was like, oh, I wish I had had this when I was trying to conceive, actually, because I had a hard time getting pregnant and never knew when I was ovulating. And so I think, for women with ovulatory disorders, it can actually be really great to know if they are ovulating. And it's such a low maintenance way. Like I remember when I was trying to conceive, I was, doing all these LH tests and I remember buying them in bulk from Amazon and just, like trying to figure out when that ovulation day was occurring. I felt like I was testing every day. With natural cycles, it's really easy. You just you wear your wearable and you open the app and it gives you that prediction as well, which is really nice. So I think it takes a lot of the guesswork out. And then also, in terms of managing how PCOS is controlled, like if you're anovulatory, you may want to treat that patient differently than if they are, maybe irregular but still ovulating. And that's, I think, an important thing to know when you're treating patients with ovulatory disorders. Also, in perimenopause, I think it's really helpful to know if that's occurring, especially if you have a woman with really heavy bleeding and you sort of want to know, is she close to the menopausal transition based on what her cycles are doing? That's something that we also provide with our insights. We kind of give, an idea of where this woman is in her stage or in her journey through perimenopause. Is she late? Is she mid? Is she early? Which I think can also have some treatment implications. And we do a very detailed cycle report. So we give, average luteal phase. We actually give a cycle by cycle breakdown of follicular and luteal phase and whether a cycle was ovulatory or anovulatory. You can also correlate symptoms. So if you're trying to, if a patient's saying they have migraines and, are these menstrual related or are they not? You can actually have them chart when they're having these migraines and correlate them to when in their cycle they're appearing. So I think there's a lot of potential uses, probably some that I haven't even mentioned, but it's, and obviously we're evolving and trying to come up with more use cases of how we can be useful to clinicians. And I think, it's exciting to think about what more we can do.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great segue to my question about what's next. To me, it's like the opportunities seem endless for integrating wearable data and other insights that we track for various reasons that are all synced in a single place. For example, it's all on my iPhone. What's on the horizon? Where all do you hope to go with this?
It's really about how are we connecting with our patients, right? We're meeting them where they are. They're on their phones. They're on social media. They're trying to get more information that we often don't have enough time to provide in the exam room. And so I think I see tech tools as being a bridge for like completing that circle between patient and clinician. And I think that's absolutely one of the main priorities that Natural Cycles has, like trying to improve the physician-patient interaction by using this data and potentially even adding more data points. Like, there's new wearables coming out every day and, more insights coming out from these wearables every day. And I think, the possibilities are endless. I'd love to see PCOS mode come up next. I think these are all things we want to tackle in the coming years.
And you alluded to this earlier. You mentioned that a lot of the data download as this product is integrated with other wearables is one way. So you're getting data from the Oura Ring or the Apple Watch, but you're not necessarily sharing data. Just wondering if there's any other data sharing concerns or privacy concerns, because these are obviously really, really personal moments in a woman's life.
For sure. And I think especially, nowadays that it's more of a concern than ever. And, I wish I could say it wasn't a concern, but I think it's unfortunately something we do have to think about. And, the one thing that I do like that Natural Cycles does, first of all, we end-to-end encrypt everything. So, from that standpoint, we have like this whole basically set of security protections known as NC Secure. And because we are a European company and CE marked in Europe, we have to be cleared with the GDPR, which is actually a much more rigorous standard for privacy protocols than even the US has. But again, because we're FDA cleared and we're regulated by the FDA, we have to be compliant with their standards as well. Also, we offer a Go Anonymous mode, which essentially completely delinks a user's fertility data from their personal information. And only the user has a key to be able to link those two together.
Got it. And, this is a new concept for many patients, for many clinicians who may not have been aware of this trend. As you mentioned, initially, you all were direct to consumer. So what kind of counseling considerations should practitioners be aware of? It's really easy to memorize the list of side effects for birth control and know risk benefits, but this feels different. So how do you approach those counseling conversations?
So I think kind of proactively having that conversation, just saying like, look, in the beginning, you may have larger fertile windows. Just be prepared for that. Make sure you have condoms on hand. And that's actually something that the app does. It's like it will prompt the user, your fertile days are coming up in a few days. Make sure you have a backup method or no, you're going to have to abstain. Also, there's feedback on the other end. We have like if a woman is charting unprotected sex during her red day window, we'll say, do you want to switch to planned pregnancy mode? Like kind of just prompting them that this is not how the application is supposed to be used. So again, it's kind of that smart communication, which does make me feel a little bit better that conversation is happening, even if I'm not having it with the patient. But yeah, I think it's again, and it's designed to be user friendly, but just really making sure you have a patient that understands what to expect and is motivated and able to use the software as intended.
Yeah, and it's really empowering women, I think, to have greater insights than historically we may have had if we were just relying on, other traditional contraceptive methods. So it's really cool to hear about how far you all have come.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think one other data point that I always love to talk about, because I almost can't believe it, but when we looked at our continuation rates in comparison to continuation rates at 1 year for other birth control methods, our continuation rates were around 76 to 80%, which is on par with the IUD. And when you look at, birth control pills are somewhere around 46 to 50, I think that it's a pretty, strong, I guess, indication of how women really like using the app. They find it, something that they want to continue to, because usually the annual point is when they'll be asked to renew their subscription. So the fact that, 76% of them are continuing at 1 year is I think, really impressive.
Yeah. And how many users do you have on the platform now?
Yeah, so it's hard to give, obviously up to the minute numbers, but it's approximately 4 million worldwide. We're cleared in about, I think it's at this point 20, 30 countries, including the US, Canada. We just got cleared in Brazil, most of Europe, South Korea, and I think soon to be Germany. So yeah, it's a really exciting time. And we have in the US, about 500,000, but I think that maybe even be an old count.
Awesome. Well, as we wrap up here, if you could give one piece of advice to clinicians who are considering digital contraceptives for their patients, what would it be?
I want to encourage clinicians to open their minds to the idea of digital contraception. That was something I definitely had to do when I first found out about it, because I think, as an OBGYN, I was always taught that fertility awareness, you better take a prenatal vitamin because you're going to end up pregnant. The game really has changed and the conversation has changed. There's, now that there is digital contraception that is solved for a lot of the problems of traditional fertility awareness methods, the convenience, the user error, the charting, I think it really is a different conversation today.
Yeah. And I think I'm really excited to see where the future takes us, because again, this is one piece of that pie. But I think as we're integrating AI into all of the aspects of healthcare, we're going to see, wearables integrate so much more with some of these interesting digital health solutions. So really, really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. I learned a lot, and I know our audience did too.
Yeah, thank you so much. Excited to see what comes in the future too.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to follow the podcast, rate it 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, direct message us at _BackTable OBGYN on Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. BackTable OBGYN is hosted by myself, Mark Hoffman,
and Amy Park.
Our production team is led by Kieran Gannon,
Aaron Bowles,
Gabe D'Agrazio,
and Josh Spencer.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz, with support from
Taylor Spurgeon-Hess and Yvonne Orgodzinsky.
Show notes and social media by Emma Landenwich
and Lindsay Beecham.
Administrative support provided by Judy Dela Cruz.
Music written and performed by Scott Baby Daddy Hoffman.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time. The views and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests on BackTable OBGYN are their own and do not reflect the views or positions of their employers or any entities they represent.